started with an invitation that felt more like a formality than a gesture. Preston Campbell, the CEO of Riverton Manufacturing, asked me to join him for lunch at Maxwell's, a high-end restaurant frequented by people who wore suits even when they weren't trying to impress anyone. I'd been there once before, years ago, for a supplier celebration. This time, I had a sinking feeling in my stomach even before I got there. Preston greeted me with a handshake and the kind of smile people wear when they're about to deliver bad news under the pretense of civility. We ordered steaks. He complimented my work ethic, my dedication, and the value I had added over the past decade. Then, between slicing into his medium-rare filet, he said, "Derek, we're going in a new direction." And said it like a visionary, someone who believed the future could only be reached by leaving the past behind. I sat quietly, letting the words land. I already knew, or at least I had suspected. For months, I had seen the subtle signs: meetings I was excluded from, documents I no longer had access to, strange questions from executives about systems they had never cared about before. This was just confirmation. Preston leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as though it mattered. Harrison's nephew just completed his master's in computer science from MIT. The board's very excited about his ideas, digital transformation, modernization, that sort of thing. I nodded, took a sip of water, and forced a smile. "Makes sense," I said. He looked almost relieved that I didn't make a scene. "You'll have 6 weeks to assist with the transition," he added, sliding a folder across the table. "Inside, a non-disclosure agreement, a list of transition protocols, and a brief note from HR thanking me for my service." I signed the NDA before dessert. There wasn't much left to say. He called it a business decision. I called it predictable. By the time I returned to my desk, my access had already changed. Admin credentials downgraded, name removed from leadership emails, calendar wiped. It was clear they'd made the decision well before lunch, and they thought I hadn't seen it coming. 11 years is a long time to give to a company, especially when that company barely acknowledges you. My name was never mentioned in shareholder reports or press releases, but behind every functional device, every secure transaction, every avoided disaster, there was me. When I first joined Riverton Manufacturing, the place was a mess. They were still using Windows XP. Passwords were scribbled on sticky notes and taped to monitors. Their server room was more fire hazard than a functional hub. I'd been sleeping on my brother's couch, recently divorced, newly adrift. The job was supposed to be a short-term fix, something to get me through a rough patch. But chaos has a way of attracting problem solvers. Riverton needed someone who understood technology, and I needed something to anchor me. I pitched a 5-year overhaul plan to Preston within the first 3 weeks. He gave me a modest budget and told me not to blow anything up. That was all I needed. The help desk grew from 5 exhausted techs to a 30-person team running shifts around the clock. We supported 3 manufacturing plants that never stopped, especially not the flagship one in Milwaukee. I redesigned the network from the ground up: hardware replacements, new servers, modern operating systems, redundancy plans, offsite backups. It took 3 years before I saw the sun regularly again. During the 2003 Northeast blackout, our facility stayed online, one of the only ones in the region that did. It wasn't luck, it was systems I had built, tested, and rebuilt, and so failure wasn't an option. That was the moment the board finally started paying attention. My budget tripled. Preston started inviting me to meetings. I wasn't just the IT guy anymore. I was becoming an architect of Riverton's resilience. I hired people I trusted. Vanessa, who could navigate any crisis without breaking a sweat, and Luis, whose brain worked like a compiler. Together, we created protocols no outside firm could have dreamed up. Real-world solutions for a company that depended on speed, uptime, and precision. We weren't just making things run smoother, we were preventing million-dollar losses before they happened. When Harrison Wells, the company's majority owner, shook my hand at the Christmas party in 2019, he said, "You turned us into a modern operation. We couldn't have expanded without your systems." I believed him, for once. I thought I'd found my place. I thought this was where I mattered. But in companies like Riverton, memory is short. People like me, we're the scaffolding. Once the building stands, we're torn down and carted away. The cracks didn't appear all at once. They started subtly, just small shifts that only someone embedded deep in the infrastructure would notice, like a quiet hum changing pitch. Again with a consultant, he arrived, unannounced, clipboard in hand, claiming to conduct an IT audit. He asked simple questions about systems I had designed, questions that no one outside the architecture team should have been curious about. When I pressed him for who authorized the review, he vaguely referenced executive oversight before changing the subject. I filed it away. Unusual, but not yet alarming. Then, my access to board meeting minutes disappeared. The shared drive, where I usually reviewed strategy updates and technical budgets, had been purged. I received a boilerplate explanation, server cleanup initiative. At the time, I almost believed it. By December, Preston began canceling our weekly one-on-ones. No real excuses, just reschedules that never got confirmed. I stopped asking. If someone doesn't want a conversation, pressing for one won't help. It all might have seemed coincidental if I hadn't also noticed activity in the server logs. 3 months before that lunch at Maxwell's, I found multiple access attempts into areas of the system that were not only sensitive, but also obscure. These weren't regular users or new employees poking around. These were precise probes. Someone with just enough access and just enough knowledge to find the right crack. The IP addresses were from the executive floor. They weren't trying to steal data in the usual sense. They were studying my documentation, reviewing contingency plans, and analyzing backup protocols. It was like watching someone memorize the blueprint of your house before asking you to move out. And then came Vanessa's warning. She'd been invited to a strategic planning meeting. I wasn't on the list, which was odd because it was a session I usually led. When she mentioned me to Preston, he brushed it off. She told me afterwards something felt wrong, like they were working around you, not with you. I tried not to overreact. I'd always prided myself on loyalty, even when the company didn't fully deserve it. My ex-wife once said I was loyal to a fault. She wasn't wrong, but the signs were growing louder. I could no longer pretend I didn't hear them. Systems I had built from scratch were being studied. Meetings were held without me. Access I once had was gone. I wasn't just being replaced. I was being extracted. Before Riverton, before the servers and the sleepless nights, there was Ellie. I moved to Milwaukee for her. She'd been accepted into a graduate program, and I figured I'd find something in security or infrastructure until we settled. At the time, I had a stable job in Minneapolis, a small house, and a sense of direction. But love tends to redraw maps without asking. We were young, optimistic, the kind of couple who thought intelligence and ambition could outpace any storm. I left my job, packed everything I owned into a U-Haul, and followed her. For a while, it felt like the right move. Then came the silence. Not loud, not angry. Just quiet. A slow drift I didn't notice until it was too late. 7 years into our marriage, I found divorce papers on the kitchen counter. There had been no shouting matches, no betrayal, just we want different things. No shared therapy sessions, no warnings. One day we were married. Next, I was alone on my brother's couch with 2 suitcases and a broken plan. That's when Riverton happened. They needed someone, anyone, really, who could patch together their tech mess after a ransomware attack had paralyzed operations. I didn't have much left to lose, so I took the interview. I saw outdated equipment, weak firewalls, and a company one bad day away from total shutdown. But I also saw an opportunity. These guys knew machines, how to weld, cut, mold, and assemble, but they were clueless when it came to digital systems. Their entire production chain was hanging by a thread made of bad software and worse habits. So I pitched a vision, not because I was ambitious at the time, but because I needed something to focus on, something I could build that wouldn't just walk out one day and say it was over. What started as a temporary job became my lifeline. In rebuilding their infrastructure, I rebuilt myself. Piece by piece, patch by patch, every server was a fresh start. Every firewall, a new boundary I could control. I poured everything into the system, and without meaning to, I built a new identity, one measured in uptime, data recovery, and silent victories that no one clapped for. but they saved me just the same. Success in a company like Riverton doesn't come with applause. It arrives quietly, sometimes through a budget increase, sometimes through an executive's nod of approval, or simply in the absence of problems no one else even realized could happen. That's how I climbed, not with titles or speeches, but with silence. Silence meant the systems were running. After the blackout in 2003, when every other facility went dark and ours kept humming, people started asking questions, not about what went wrong, but how we had avoided disaster. That was the first time Preston invited me to an executive meeting. He introduced me as the guy who made sure we could still ship parts when everyone else went dark. I didn't wear a suit. I didn't talk much, but I brought results, charts, uptime logs, fallback procedures. I spoke the language of function, not flair. Over the next few years, my influence grew. I was given a blank check to hire who I needed. That's when I brought Vanessa on full-time. She had a background in systems engineering and an intuition for crisis management that made her indispensable. Luis came soon after, a coder who didn't just solve problems but anticipated them. We didn't just respond to incidents, we prevented them. Riverton's clients began to notice. Orders came in faster, fulfillment was more reliable, and our system could predict component shortages before they happened. Preston stopped seeing me as just an IT guy and started viewing me as part of his infrastructure strategy. You're not just supporting the business, he said during one quarterly review. You are the business. And he wasn't wrong. Our department transformed from a backslash and cost center into the engine that made Riverton's expansion possible. When Harrison Wells, the majority owner, shook my hand at the 2019 holiday party, he said, "You've brought this company into the 21st century." It was the first and only time I felt fully seen. I began to believe I had finally carved out something permanent. I wasn't flashy, but I was essential, the kind of person companies protect when times get hard. I thought merit had weight, that if you built enough, gave enough, and stayed late enough, you earned safety. I believed that until the signs started shifting. And even then, I still gave them the benefit of the doubt. Because for a long time, Riverton had been more than a job. It had been my redemption. 2 days after the lunch at Maxwell's, I stayed late, part habit, part defiance. The server room was quiet, filled with the soft hum of cooling fans and blinking indicator lights. That space had become something like sacred ground to me. Every cable routed by hand, every rack labeled in a system only I truly understood. 11 years of effort lived behind those doors. That's when I met him. And that's M. Blake. He stood in the doorway like he already belonged there. Clean cut, maybe 30 at most, tailored shirt, expensive watch, and a kind of smooth confidence you don't earn, you inherited from proximity to power. The nephew of Harrison Wells. "Just getting the lay of the land," he said casually, stepping inside without asking. I turned from the main console. "Routine checks," I replied. "Need something?" He looked around like a real estate agent appraising a fixer-upper. "Preston said you'd be showing me around soon." Did he? He knelt near one of the lower server racks, examined the wiring. "Impressive setup," he said. "A bit old school, but solid." 8 months earlier, I'd completed a major system-wide refresh, new hardware, custom scripts, and redundancy upgrades. Old school felt like an insult delivered with a smile. Then came the kicker. "Your documentation is really thorough. I've been reading through your protocols, got a few ideas for modernization." He said it like he was doing me a favor. I didn't flinch, looking forward to hearing them. The words felt foreign in my mouth. Later that night, I pulled the access logs again. Sure enough, Nathan's credentials had been created 3 weeks before my lunch with Preston. He already had top-tier admin rights. He'd browsed my entire documentation library. They hadn't even waited until after the announcement. He'd been operating in my systems with my credentials before I even knew his name. I texted Luis, "Coffee tomorrow, Joe's, 6:30. And then I drove out to the lakefront, was where Ellie and I used to go, back when hope still felt like a shared project. I sat in the car watching the black water shimmer beneath the streetlights, thinking about the day Preston promoted me. He'd said, "You're the backbone of this place." Turns out, even backbones can be replaced. By the time I met Luis at Joe's Cafe the next morning, the clarity had set in. We sat at our usual corner table, dark roast in hand, as snow gathered on the windows. The air between us was quiet, heavy with unspoken truths. "They're phasing me out," I said. Luis didn't look surprised, just tired. "I figured," he replied. "They've been asking me to explain parts of the system, stuff only you built, for a few weeks now." "I'm not mad at you," I told him. He nodded. He had a family, 2 kids, and a mortgage. Survival came before loyalty. I respected that. "So what's your plan?" he asked. I hadn't realized I had one, but the question grounded me, made everything solid. "They think everything's in the documentation," I said, "but you and I both know it's not." Luis leaned in. "The patches, the custom diagnostics, the monitoring system. All undocumented," I confirmed. "Built off mines on my own framework. It's not sabotage," I added, "but I'm not handing over what's mine." He sat back, studying me, then gave the smallest nod. "Tell me what you need." I asked for everything I had ever developed outside official work hours, custom scripts, log files, build sequences. I also needed to know who else might be loyal, who still remembered what I'd done to hold Riverton together when everything was falling apart. The official announcement came a few days later at the quarterly all-hands meeting. Preston stood at the podium with Nathan beside him, beaming like a politician's son. "Derek has been instrumental in building our IT infrastructure," Preston said, without once meeting my eyes. "And we're grateful for his help during this exciting transition." There was a hush across the room. My team looked stunned. Vanessa stared across the floor at me, concerned, confused. I gave her a small nod. Afterward, I asked for a meeting with HR and Preston. I reminded them that some of the systems Nathan was inheriting, like System Sync, were built using my own code base, predating my employment. Diane from HR slid a contract across the table. "Anything created during your time here belongs to Riverton," she said. "Not everything," I replied. "System Sync was licensed, not sold. I retained ownership, read the agreement." Preston shifted in his seat. "That was 10 years ago. The system's been rebuilt multiple times. Based on my original framework," I said. "Every update, every layer still runs on my architecture." They exchanged glances. "We'll look into it," Diane said finally. I stood. "Do that. In the meantime, I'll focus on the transition." But I knew they were stalling. I also knew I had just said the first thing that truly made them nervous. The next morning, my access to the development servers was restricted. An automated email arrived at 6:07 AIM citing security protocol during transition periods. I'd expected it. Still, seeing that door slam shut on code I'd written, systems I'd built, hit differently. They weren't just replacing me. They were walling me off from my own legacy. Nathan held a meeting later that day. I wasn't invited. I showed up anyway. He blinked when he saw me in the doorway, but quickly recovered. "Derek, glad you could join. We're discussing updates to the network architecture." I folded my arms. "Which architecture exactly?" "The main production systems," he said, tapping the whiteboard. "We're going to streamline protocol layers." I let that hang in the air. "Those layers are what keep the machines from overheating under load. They're tailored for our specific equipment." Nathan smiled tightly. "Modern systems don't require that kind of complexity." "They're not complex," Vanessa interrupted from the table. "They're calibrated. Derek built those after the 2018 overload incident." Silence. You could hear the servers humming 3 floors below us. Nathan recovered. "I appreciate the historical insight," he said, and turned back to the board. That night, I received an email from Riverton's legal team. They were asserting full ownership over all software systems, including System Sync, citing a clause about integrated technologies becoming company property. As compensation, they offered a $5,000 0 cents technology acquisition bonus. That number was an insult. Worse than that, it was a warning. "Back off or this gets legal." The next day, Luis texted me. "Nathan's doing one-on-ones, job evaluations. He asked if your systems were really necessary." He was gutting my team, testing their loyalty, fishing for weakness. I knew the playbook. Undermine the old guard, elevate the new. I'd seen it done before, just never from the inside. That evening, I opened an email from one of our suppliers. It had been forwarded to my personal account by mistake. They were confused about a licensing agreement Riverton had just sent over, one I hadn't authorized. The integration I'd custom built for them had been reassigned to a third-party vendor, a startup founded by one of Nathan's former classmates. They weren't just pushing me out, they were packaging and selling off everything I'd made. By the time I tried to access the backup servers, my credentials had been revoked entirely. I sat there staring at the access denied screen, feeling something inside me harden. This wasn't incompetence, it was the strategy. They were methodically erasing my presence. They wanted control. Fine, I still had something they didn't leverage. That night, I called Darren Phillips. He was a security expert I'd worked with years ago on a freelance defense contract. We met at a diner just off the interstate, the kind of place no one from Riverton would ever be caught dead in. After I laid everything out, Darren leaned back and frowned. Legally, it's a mess, but something doesn't add up. Why push you out now? The company's not struggling. That's what I can't figure out, I admitted. Let me look into it, he said. Just surface-level research. 2 nights later, he called me at nearly midnight. You need to see this. He forwarded SEC filings, acquisition prep documents, and internal shareholder memos. Riverton was negotiating a buyout. Tech Core Industries, a conglomerate out of Boston, was in final stage talks to acquire the company. But the deal came with conditions. One of them, Riverton had to show that its tech infrastructure was modern, scalable, and transferable. They're cleaning house to make themselves look lean and transition ready, Darren explained. And your systems are a huge part of the valuation. He wasn't wrong. Textor's analysis specifically cited System Sync, the custom management interface I designed, as one of Riverton's core assets. My asset. It got worse. Harrison Wells had cashed out most of his shares the quarter before. Preston and the executive team stood to receive massive bonuses and job titles after the merger. Golden parachutes. I wasn't part of the plan. I was an obstacle to be removed quietly. And then Darren showed me the emails, internal messages between Preston and Harrison dated more than 6 months ago. While I'd been working 14-hour days to fix a security breach, they were already interviewing Nathan. That night, I drove to the abandoned warehouse where I'd first sketched System Sync on a legal pad. I sat in my car until dawn. The next morning, I found an old external hard drive. On it was everything I needed. The original System Sync code base, predating my time at Riverton. The game had changed. Now, I had proof. The meeting came sooner than expected. Preston and Diane from HR summoned me on a Wednesday morning. Nathan sat at the end of the table like he'd earned the right to be there. We're accelerating the transition, Preston said without a hint of preamble. Your last day will be next Friday. 2 weeks instead of 6, I noted. Any particular reason? Nathan has demonstrated exceptional capability, Diane replied smoothly. And frankly, Derek, your attitude hasn't supported a productive handover. I looked at them calmly. Understood. I'll make sure the transition is thorough. Nathan smirked. We need all documentation finalized by Wednesday. I gave a polite nod. Of course. And System Sync. Have you had a chance to review the original agreements regarding ownership? Preston stiffened. Our legal team has determined that integrated technologies fall under Riverton's intellectual property. Then I suggest you double-check Clause 7 of the licensing contract from 11 years ago, I said. System Sync was never sold. It was licensed. I retained all rights, including revocation. Diane started to say something, but I was already standing. You'll be hearing from my attorney. That evening, Luis handed me a flash drive in the grocery store parking lot. It contained everything, the original code, deployment logs, and authentication keys. Why are you doing this? I asked him. Because they think we're all replaceable, he said. We're not. I spent the weekend finalizing documentation and filing provisional patents on System Sync's key modules. Not the whole thing, just the irreplaceable parts. I moved everything to a secure offsite server. Then I created a standalone version of the software independent from Riverton's infrastructure, but perfectly capable of replacing it. By Tuesday, I had played the part of the model employee. I attended meetings, I answered questions, I smiled. But that night, using credentials Luis had preserved, I implemented one final measure, a license verification mechanism. It wouldn't destroy anything, but it would check if the software was being used without authorization. And if it was, it would expire at exactly 9:17 a.m., the Monday after my departure. Friday came, and I signed the exit paperwork, declined the fake lunch Nathan had arranged, turned in my badge, and walked out the front door. At 9:17 a.m. the following Monday, just as the production floor hit full operational capacity, every instance of system sync across Riverton's 3 facilities displayed the same message. License expired. Please contact the developer to renew. By 9:45, all lines were offline. By 10:30, Preston called me. What the hell did you do? Nothing, I said. The license expired. As the developer, I'm happy to discuss renewal terms. This is sabotage. No, I said calmly. It's contract enforcement. Clause 7. More so. Silence. I've already sent a new licensing agreement to your legal team. It includes proper attribution, fair compensation, and a non-disclosure clause regarding the circumstances of my departure. That's extortion. That's business. By 5:00 p.m., the contract was signed. 3 days later, I sat across from the VP of Operations at TechCore Industries. They were still acquiring Riverton, but wanted me on board, not as an employee, but as a consultant. Twice the salary, total autonomy, full control over System Sync's development. What about Nathan, I asked. The VP's face soured. Mr. Blake will be transitioning to other opportunities. Luis called 2 weeks later. He's gone, quietly pushed out. 3 major clients threatened to cancel after system failures. Russian remained CEO in name only, a ceremonial figure. No team, no decisions, just a title and an office out of the way. I didn't feel the victory I expected, only certainty. I hadn't burned the system down. I just reminded them it wasn't theirs to control. With my first consulting check, I bought a small cabin by the lake. A quiet place to watch sunsets, to build again on my terms. Vanessa joined the team first, then Luis. Within a few months, half my old department was working with me, not for me. We weren't just rebuilding software. We were building something that respected its builders. A year later, I ran into Preston downtown. He looked older, worn. He started to walk away, then stopped. You won, he said quietly. It was never about winning, I replied. It was about knowing my worth. He nodded, then left. And I sat there, thinking not about revenge, but about value and the systems that endure because someone cared enough to build them right.